Hi everyone, welcome to the show. We're really pleased to introduce you to Ryan Cunningham, a driving force in the world of PowerApps. Today we delve into the maker experience, ALM for Canvas apps, and the Power Control framework. Ryan is the Principal Group Program Manager at Microsoft for PowerApps and has been described as one of the best names out there. For full show notes, go to nz365guide.com/72. Now let's get on with the show. Hi Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be here.
Excellent. So before we get underway, tell me a bit about friends, family, and what you do kind of outside of your Microsoft day job.
You're allowed to do things outside of your Microsoft day job?
I should hope so.
Nobody told me. No, I have a young family, a couple small kids, a 4-year-old and not quite 2. So I used to have really exciting answers to this question of hobbies outside of work, and now I have a basement that is a museum of all of those hobbies that I used to have. No, I joke a bit. It's pretty cool to as a product guy. It's pretty cool to have little kids, and really humbling to see how as humans we ship with really zero features, and,
so true.
And develop them very rapidly.
Yeah.
With feedback. So it's been a cool season of life seeing that come together.
So good. So before you had children, what did you do for hobbies?
Lots of stuff, man. I live spoiled by the Pacific Northwest here in the Puget Sound region, and definitely an avid and very amateur outdoorsman and sailor and adventure traveler and that kind of stuff. But we still get out. It's just a slightly different speed and reach. Yeah.
Awesome. So your role in Microsoft, what are you, the group program manager, principal group program manager? What does that mean, and kind of what do you own?
Yeah, that's there's a lot of adjectives in that title, right? So I work on the platform team, right? So we sort of own the broader platform that sits under Dynamics and sits under PowerApps, and within that we're sort of organized into a primary focus on the types of people that use it. And so the world that I own and co-lead with a engineering lead is the maker world. And so we own all the maker-facing experiences. That's PowerApps.com. Everything I do to build apps, the Canvas experience, also the whole world of the model-driven experiences that we've inherited from the Dynamics platform. Everything from designing a form to a view, an entity, and obviously those CDS experiences around it. Mm-hmm. That's sort of the maker view.
Excellent. So. Are you specifically involved in CDS, or are you more the layer that's kind of building the presentation layer into CDS?
That's a great question. I think we work really closely with the core CDS platform team, which is also led by Ryan. Ryan Jones is my counterpart there, right?
I just had him on last week.
There you go, right? So his team is focused sort of at the API layer and everything behind it. And then my team is focused on that layer right above it, which is the tooling and experiences for, adding fields, adding business logic, adding rules, and then using that in applications. And of course, there's a layer above us in the cake, which is, all the actual bits that get exposed to an end user running an app.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Excellent. We're going to drill into that in more detail. I found this quote about you online from Mike Stone, and he said, "Ryan's awesome. Period. Bright, articulate, perceptive, perpetually optimistic. He can talk engineering with engineers, business with founders, design with designers, and vision with everyone. Equally at ease with the audience of 1 or 100. So tell me, how does that translate, which is a massive endorsement? Tell me, how does that translate to business, engineering, design, and vision in context of your role?
You're making me blush, man. It's definitely one of the best compliments I've ever received from a naval lieutenant, no less. But look, I think it's really hard to do this job, to build products in isolation of any one of those worlds of conversation and discipline. It is relatively. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's actually easy. It's easy to sit in a foxhole and write code. And never talk to anybody or think about the implications of it, and hope for the best, right? It's easy to work in PowerPoint all day long and build the most beautiful plan, but not act on it, right? And it's easy to talk about it all day long and not do the others. But it is impossible to do any of those things well, I think, without doing all of them at once. And that really becomes the struggle in terms of building a great product that people will want to use. That's absolutely not. That's not a binary state, right? It's a journey, and it's a constant negotiation between what's possible, what's desirable, what's practical, and what can we do to push the boundaries. So yeah, for me, it's just so hard to separate the story from the product from the business. The rub is just balancing all three of those at the same time.
Yeah. So tell me, how do you kind of keep business? There's two areas I really want to drill into. I'll put engineering to one side because it's kind of like Microsoft's an engineering company. We get that, and you know the quality that comes out of that. But how do you kind of keep business kind of at the center of what you do? You know, at the end of the day, the software is going to be used by businesses and organizations that it's going to ultimately, if we're just talking at the Power Platform level here, is going to be their tool set to run their companies, you know, their line of business applications. How do you keep business and very much a business focus outside it? And I don't mean business of licensing, but the business of your customer's business, if you like.
Right. It's a great question. It's one that we are constantly asking ourselves here as we drive this organization forward, and frankly, constantly experimenting with, just like we're constantly shipping new features into the product. But some of the rhythms that we work with on the team here are really designed to force that customer perspective on a problem. When we go talk about building a new feature or even improving an existing one, those conversations don't even make it on the docket unless we have validated that as an idea with a lot of votes, or an issue that's been raised by top customers, or something we've identified in telemetry as being a blocker for a certain scenario. And when we raise it, we go through a process where we have sort of a triad, a co-ownership between a product manager who's sort of thinking about the overall, the way a feature should work and how it fits in the bigger system, an engineering manager who's thinking about, keeping us practical and honest, and how do we build it performantly and reliably and get it out to the world efficiently, and a UX designer who's thinking about how do we actually make this a nice thing to use, right? That people are going to want it, right? And they own a process, we call it an experience review. And that sort of forces a template on looking at, okay, what is the experience today? What are the problems with that? What do actual customers tell us, and what do we observe, empirically that they struggle with today? What do they expect in the market? What do our competitors do? What are other just common patterns for this area? And therefore, what are we proposing for our improved experience? And we mandate that that those teams sort of take a real human customer they've talked to as an example and walk through, the proposed experience in those flows, in order to help validate that, right? And then that's sort of the root of it, and then all the way through, shipping that thing and rolling it out into previews. Obviously, we're trying to work as out loud as possible. Get early usage of preview environments. Get even earlier, live feedback as designs and bits are coming together. And just be as frankly skeptical of our own assumptions as possible, in order to get things out into the world. And it's a tough balance, right? I mean, I think it's never going to be perfect, but I think we are constantly working to go build that sort of empathy into our team, for what customers experience with the product. And we do other things too, right? We're constantly sending engineers and PMs to not only events and conferences, but also customer locations. We recently kicked off this program in my team called Meet Your Maker, which is I like not a reference to death, but we're actually pairing up engineers and product managers and going and sending them to spend a couple days with live customers every so often, and just marinate in how people are using their tools all day long. And not just to help people with them, but to actually come back and build better product in the first place. So.
So what questions are you getting from customers in these type of engagements, particularly around UX?
Yeah.
Are you getting requests for things from a UX perspective or even a UI perspective?
For sure, and I think that happens at lots of levels. I think there's this state we're in right now where we have sort of combined the modern and recently launched PowerApps product with everything that has existed in the Dynamics 365 platform for many years, and that means that even just from a maker perspective, we have many generations of user experiences all
Correct.
sort of sandwiched on top of each other, right?
I know it.
And look, we did that very intentionally. The classic maybe classic Microsofty thing would have been to go dark for 2 years and perfectly recreate every experience and go launch it in some big fanfare. And hope that we got it right along the way. In the real world, hope is not really a strategy for that. There's plenty of existence proof that, to your earlier point, we need to work out loud much more concretely and iterate much more closely with customers. And also from a realism standpoint, we had great and growing usage, dramatically growing usage on the modern PowerApps stack, but also obviously this very large community, very mature community of users and makers on the XRM stack, on the Dynamics stack, and increasingly, even before we announced this unification, people using those two things together at the same time. And so, for us, I like to say, about 6 months ago, we kind of ripped the platform out from under Dynamics and spray painted it purple and duct taped it onto the side of PowerApps and said, "Here you go." But we did that very intentionally in order to not slow down and to show the world that we're bringing these things together, and then very incrementally start to modernize and merge them together. And so a lot of the questions we get are, at the low level, when will X feature be available at PowerApps.com? When will I have full parity with the entity editing experience? Or when will you modernize the form designer? Or et cetera, et cetera. I think at the higher level, it's also just sort of what is the overall arc and roadmap for bringing these concepts together? Are Canvas apps and model-driven apps always going to be separate? Will they ever meet? What will it look like in 6 or 12 months to go build a application on this stack? And I think we are progressively crisping up our vision of what that means as we get active feedback and have those conversations. We do have a very clear vision of what it means, but I would be lying if I told you I knew exactly to the pixel level what the product is going to look like in 3 years. Because I don't, and that's intentional, right? And,
it's evolution.
And we got to evolve it as we go. I think we also get questions increasingly about, not just what are the maker experiences going to look like, but how do I make apps that my users are going to love? And how do I not just make a client happy or an IT department happy, but how do I actually, bring the frontline workers and the end users along to a place where they are, thrilled to be using these tools and feeling productive and empowered because of it. And that's a really exciting challenge to look at from a full platform perspective, and also particularly from a maker perspective. How do you help people make better things? So nice. Those are all questions we get a lot, and they're great questions.
It's good.
Long
it's
answers.
good.
Yeah.
No, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So how do you balance, though, if you like, the requests coming from the market, what you can kind of show, and
Right.
then, you're in a competitive landscape, so you don't want to kind of reveal too much too soon until you've
Right.
kind of got it baked to a level that you're going to, see it to market.
Sure.
How do you kind of create that balance to kind of, get the feedback and then still go to market in time?
It's a good question. I mean, I think the hardest part of product management is not, enumerating the list of things that could be better or you need to improve. It's saying no to most of them. It's knowing how to prioritize and where to focus the energy. And you're right. I think the answer to that is a mix of what is the direct feedback we're getting from current customers, what is the opportunity for net new users and customers that we want to address and bring into the platform. And what is the rest of the market doing? Where are our competitors going in order to influence those expectations? I can tell you one thing that we are not as concerned about, and not nearly as concerned about as maybe Microsoft used to be, is sort of the concern of pre-disclosure or competitive concerns around that. I mean, I think we will be more conservative with what we disclose at a specificity level publicly, more because we don't want to give users and customers a misperception or create an expectation that we're going to ship something that we end up not shipping, or we end up changing our thoughts around on the way to shipping. But at the same time, I've used this phrase "working out loud." We really value that here, and we'll go ship experimental features that you opt into that are experimental because we're not 100% sure if that's the way we're going to roll it out. And we want feedback, but we want people to get hands-on with it and use it before we go make a public commitment. And we were trying to get more disciplined here as an organization about publishing our roadmap, at least 6 months ahead of time, and continuing to keep those investments updated, because we will make better investments and better decisions if we get input on them ahead of time and not just after the fact.
Yeah, so true, so true.
Yeah.
Speaking from experience of,
right.
the last 7 years, I've been up against it.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
How do you manage then things like patents and stuff, where you've got to kind of control a limited view of who gets to know about something that you're going to patent before you can kind of broadly spread, talk about it?
And that's fair. And, we definitely have, we are not short on legal advice here at a company the size of Microsoft, right? We work very close with that team. And yes, there are things from a technology perspective that we are working on here that, merit some level of discretion before we go broadly public with them. And even in the release notes process, there are things that we hold back for that reason sometimes. But at the same time, it is still possible to talk about the problem areas we're going to address and the issues we're tackling without getting necessarily to the implementation detail specifics that might compromise a conversation like that. And any other thing I'll say is usually, just from a filing and disclosure standpoint, a feature that is, robust and innovative enough to protect IP around usually takes long enough to implement that it's possible to get that IP conversation rolling with enough time and lead time to then go make your disclosures.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, cool. So I was at Business Application Summit, and you demoed, and I just what struck with me was the energy and this contagious energy that you had. Kind of. So, what's your routine to get ready to go on stage? To kind of, you've got a big audience, you got some music on, or what's up?
You mean not everybody's as excited about business applications as I am, man? No, I mean, look, I'll actually be. I'll back up from your immediate question of what do I do right before I go on stage. I'll say, from a macro sense, I sort of stumbled into business applications as a space, and when I did, I was not nearly as excited about it as last March when I was up on stage. I was working at a very small startup in a different space. We sort of were acquired into the Microsoft org, and I never thought that this would be the type of thing that I would get excited about until I sat down and spent some time with it and realized that this is such a richer space than just, forms over data. And at some level, the stuff we do as a community is really powering the entire economy and shaping, in many ways, not just, the efficiency at which we all consume goods and services, but also, shaping the daily lives of most people in their jobs. And it's really a huge responsibility, but also a really exciting opportunity to think about, having an influence on that type of environment. And, being able to sort of take PowerApps, I joined Microsoft and joined the project about 3 years ago, just before even the private preview of PowerApps, and so I've been lucky enough to kind of ride this wave from on the PowerApps end from nothing to this very vibrant community of really powerful stories, right? And The story we shared at that business application summit, Martin, the maker at Belron, who, a few months ago was a dispatcher, who was jockeying Excel spreadsheets and sending people out on site to fix windshields, and now is deployed 70 apps into his company, saved millions of dollars, completely transformed how his coworkers work and his own life and career. That's just incredibly rewarding, and it's incredibly rewarding to be able to sort of help create the conditions in which people like that can succeed and businesses can change. And that's just fundamentally energizing. But yes, yeah. I do have headphones backstage and pump myself up from time to time too before we get out there, right?
Nice.
Yeah.
So tell me, what was that path into the business applications team? Were you in Project Sienna at the start, or was the company that got acquired from you, did that become part of this, what we're playing with today? How did you end up in this team?
A little bit. It was a very early stage exit. It was not a major mature piece of technology, but we were working on a different end of the problem of sort of aggregating data among many sources. And so a bunch of our team from that previous company ended up joining and working on the data connectivity and integration story and the connectors and whatnot. But I sort of jumped into through that transition, jumped into right at the moment that sort of Project Sienna was becoming PowerApps. And PowerApps was sort of becoming a thing that Microsoft was getting ready to talk to, and really graduating from what had been actually a long-running internal research project into an actual productizable piece of technology that Microsoft was going to take a major bet on. So that was really about 3 years ago at this time. In fact, it was in Barcelona at I forget all the names of the conferences that we've had over the last many years in late 2015 that we sort of told the world that we were doing this thing called PowerApps and opened a private invite only preview, sort of the evolved first step into the cloud from Sienna, and it's come a long way since then, but it's been a fun ride.
So obviously you're on the switch from what was formerly known as CDS1.
Right.
To, if you like, the underlying code base of what was Dynamics. Right. What kind of got to that decision-making point was actually we're just reinventing something that's pretty robust that we have, and you make that pivot kind of, what was the thinking there?
I mean, I think obviously we made a big shift there. As we were initially taking PowerApps to market, we knew that we needed a robust native data platform, that it was not enough. It was very powerful to go be able to point at SharePoint, point at SQL, point at any other data source and build a mashup UI over it. But that until we had sort of a richer onboard understanding of logic and rules and relationships at enterprise scale, that it would be difficult to achieve the ambition we had to really build mission critical business apps and build lots of them for customers. And so we had initially looked at many of the investments that Microsoft had in that space. And actually the CDS1 effort was not necessarily a start from scratch. It was largely based on and sort of a lot of the talent came from the finance and operations platform, which is quite robust. In fact, you may argue, is doing even more sophisticated things than in some use cases than the classic CRM stack. I think where we started though was really trying to modernize that from the ground up and build it from the ground up. And at the time, we also looked very deeply at XRM. But at that time, XRM was still very tightly coupled to the applications built on top of it. Was not in Azure. Had a lot of things sort of conceptually that led us down the path we went down. Now, I think we fast forwarded a year and realized it's actually quite hard to rebuild from scratch a very robust enterprise grade data platform, right? And even though architecturally we were making great progress and it was fast and performant and modern, it had a lot of other feature gap challenges, right? And adoption challenges because of that. At the same time, the XRM platform made great progress at that same time. Was then in Azure, was then much more detached from the core apps. Obviously had a massive number of users and data and capabilities already there in the platform, and it became obvious. And rather than feeling entrenched and wedded to the decisions of the past, we made the practical decision to sort of say, okay, how do we take advantage of those features and bring those features into the fold? In some ways, yes, it was a shift in our implementation approach. I would not at all call it a shift in strategy. The strategy has always been, build a single common tool set of extensibility tools across the Microsoft clouds, across Office and Dynamics and Azure, be able to scale in sophistication from something as simple as one custom SharePoint form all the way to something as robust as Dynamics 365 for sales, and be able to do it rapidly, right? And I think, on that, we have been incredibly consistent on how we go about that most efficiently. We've talked a lot about being iterative here. That's sort of the core value of how we're moving. So the net result is, yes, we end up with some links out to older UX, but at the same time, last March we were able to add overnight a massive amount of capabilities to this standalone offering of CDS. And we were able to do it with a community that already knew how to use them and already was using them, right? And even without adding any features really at that moment, we're able to offer the ability to go use those tools without having to buy Dynamics 365 for sales, service, and marketing. And that alone is a big asset. And then, we sort of set ourselves up for the expectation, obviously, that we would then integrate and modernize and push forward the tooling itself. And that's the commitment we're living up to.
So at what point does Office 365 kind of move into the Dynamics suite?
That's a great question. I think, look, there are always some things that it will not make sense to store in a relational, SQL Azure-based data store, right?
Everything that sits in SharePoint.
Right. Well, everything sits in SharePoint, all of my emails, my calendars, my chats, my conversations, right? It absolutely makes sense to have a RESTful endpoint for those things and not necessarily try to force them into a relational model. So from an architectural conversation standpoint, I don't think that's really the road we're going down just for the sake of purity, right? I think we absolutely want to make it increasingly possible and powerful to go relate those things to each other. But that doesn't necessarily have to mean platform migration, right? Now, I think from an offering standpoint and from how we package and go to market with this stuff, there's a reason why we moved forward with the brand of PowerApps for the platform and for the maker experiences, because it is the common thread that already Office has a dependency on. If you talk to Jeff Teeper or others in Office leadership, PowerApps and Flow are a feature of Office, and they're an included feature of Office that you can't turn off. It's a fundamental value to be able to customize Office, and it's a huge leap forward to have one set of tools to do that, as opposed to a bunch of disparate InfoPath over here and VBA over here and Access over here. So from a strategy standpoint, the company is very, very aligned on that, well beyond the Dynamics world, and increasingly doubled down on that. But that is very different from then how we go, store bits and bytes in different places.
Yeah, tell me about the admin experience over the maker experience and kind of how you see that playing out at the moment. Being that I come from a very XRM background, I've had a lot of admin functionality inside my, if you like, what we're now calling the maker experience.
Right.
And we're starting to see that separate out into an admin portal, and then the web.powerapps being kind of where the maker experience kicks off from. Do you see just those two portals and there's a separation between admin and, if you like, the maker experience?
Well, I will say, look, we certainly have resources focused on both of those needs, to the extent that they are distinct. And in many ways, they are distinct, right? How do I provision an environment, manage users, assign security roles, check health, buy services? Those are all sort of one mindset, if you will, and set of tasks versus, how do I go add a field to a form, build an app, customize something. Now, in many large organizations, those are radically different humans who sit in different places with different job titles. But for many of us, it can be very much one human doing all of those tasks together at one time, right? And so I think, from the way we have apportioned resources, we do have a team focused on admin experiences and provisioning and lifecycle and all of that. In fact, if you haven't talked to James Olenek, my peer who looks after admin, he's a great person to chat with as well. But I think, look, our goal is not to artificially fork the experiences and create confusion for folks who do have to do both tasks. It's just to create clarity and focus on the tasks themselves. And I think we are. In the spirit of constantly evolving and being better, we're actively looking at how do we make those distinct when they need to be distinct, but cohesive when they need to be cohesive. How do we literally start to reuse bits and frameworks of UI and embed pieces in other places and make sure that those lines are less apparent where they don't need to be, is real important to us. But I will say that administration and governance is incredibly important in this platform. It's always been important, obviously, in the XRM space, but it adds a new layer of meaning and importance when you look at the full picture of what PowerApps can be, where it can be both a tool for sort of top-down development. My company invests in a stack and a series of professionals, both inside and out the company, go deliver on top of that stack, and then mandates who in the company is going to use the output. That's the classic model, as well as now this more bottom-up citizen-led model of we're going to give capabilities to a large swath of humans, and they are going to be able to solve problems on their own. As a company, we still need visibility into what they're doing and governance over what they're doing and discoverability over what they're doing, and that adds this sort of new shade of what it means to be an admin in this world. As we've seen customers evolve from one or two apps on the platform to hundreds of apps on the platform, and there are many customers in that state already, and those apps being developed by a mix of sort of centrally managed top-down initiatives as well as bottom-up, initiatives. What it means to be an admin is definitely rapidly evolving. What it means to have a center of excellence or a practice around PowerApps is rapidly evolving.
Yeah,
and we're trying to evolve along with it.
Where do you see the kind of should I say, unifying of Canvas and model-driven apps coming? I see there two. They fill, if you like, two separate roles in an organization. So I don't see them coming together as in they do two distinct different things. The beauty is they're built on CDS, at their core. But do you see kind of, when I say unification, as I will be able to embed into a form, for example, a model-driven app inside, inside a model-driven app?
Yeah, and by we'll be able to, we posted that blog post literally yesterday, so you now can embed Canvas apps into model forms. It's in preview now, but in public preview. We've been sort of privately previewing it for several months now, actually. So definitely go use that. That to us is just a first step. I mean, I think, look, conceptually, these two methods of application building have incredibly complementary capabilities. What's very powerful about the declarative sort of model-driven experience is, I can go define a very rich and robust set of logical relationships between things, and then a bunch of user experience gets automatically generated. And I can go very rapidly build, 80, 90 screen apps with multiple processes and multiple roles. And I don't have to go place every button and bind every gallery and, do every piece of low-level control. I think the trade-off you've always had in that world, and it's just a necessary trade-off of the value of that system, is that I'm then much more wedded to the data platform. right? Because that's where the logic comes from. That's where the entities are defined. That's where the relationships live. And so, data integration has always been more of a science project into a classic Dynamics 365 experience. And I'm much more wedded to the user experience that gets generated, right? Because this is all sort of generated over metadata at runtime. When I want to go customize the experience a user has, classically I've had to break into code and do unnatural things really quickly, or completely write my own front end and work with an SDK on the back end, which is a whole other proposition, right? And not only is that expensive, it also tends to make it much easier to break into jail from a performance and reliability standpoint. And so that's just a necessary sort of trade-off that and look, this is not unique to Dynamics as a platform. This is something that every declarative platform, whether it's Salesforce or Oracle or others, has struggled with for a long time. On the flip side, the PowerApps canvas is almost exactly the opposite. I started a blank canvas that has absolutely no marriage to a particular data source, no predefinition of UI. And I can craft exactly the experience I want. And I can do it without writing a bunch of HTML and JavaScript and React, right? I can put the buttons and the forms and the drop downs and the visuals exactly where I need them and do it really quickly. And because it's very data source agnostic, I can go bring in hundreds of things. I think, again, the natural and consequential trade-off of that is I have to go place every low-level primitive exactly where I want it. I have to bind it. I have to reuse it, right? I have to go make all these decisions, and it's great for your sort of frontline worker task and role specific app that maybe has 5 or 10 screens and is very on rails as experience, which by the way I think is where a lot of the innovation is needed in the market right now, and where we see a ton of hockey sticking traction. But when I want to go build this immersive back office multivariate thing, it can be very tedious, right? And so I think we have these things. We had separately funded and developed both of these things. Seeing both of them, really seeing PowerApps take off and in relation to the Dynamics business maturing, it did not make sense to operate them in isolation as businesses. But I think even as application types, yes, there are sort of fundamental differences, but they don't necessarily need to exist in that way. And so, we do see them coming together over time. Now, I think the rub for us, and it's been kind of the theme of this conversation, is to do that practically and to make constant forward progress for people using all of the above, and to really avoid the classic technology trap of being dissatisfied with the two things you currently have, so inventing a third thing, and that is not the plan here, right? So I think the more practical plan to kind of land this a bit more concretely is to really look at ways to componentize and sort of cross-pollinate between the two. Yes, you're now, as of today, able to embed components I build on the canvas into model-driven experiences. We are rapidly investing here in that componentization story in general. You may have heard about the PowerApps control framework, this effort to... I
was just going to bring that up with you, actually, because that sparked off my thinking on it. Yes.
Exactly, right? So we want professional developers to be able to build components over CDS and other data sources more efficiently, plug and play them into user experiences. We have been less loud about it, but because we're among friends here, we have also been working on ways to build reusable canvas components. And so without writing code, to be able to build custom pieces of an app, pieces of an experience, and reuse those across different places. And we have also been in parallel then funding, a lot of investment into making sure that those things I build custom, whether it's in PCF as a pro dev or on the canvas, can take advantage of all the same richness that's in CDS in the data platform, the rules, the relationships, the validation, the business logic in the to the same level that the traditional UCI model driven runtime knows how to interpret. And I think as you see those things start to happen, it's not so hard to imagine a world where there's a couple ways to build an app and they're not mutually exclusive, right? I can go point at logically a set of assets, build me an app over accounts and contacts and leads with these forms and these views. But then it's a very natural gesture to say, and I want to customize screen 7. I want to go replace this thing that you generated for me with something custom, or I want to go grab a collection of components, some of which were modeled, some of which were developed custom by a pro, some of which I'm going to develop myself, and I want to go compose those together into one thing. I think you'll start to see us make really incremental steps towards that vision and make those things true. And we will make that sort of forced top level distinction between canvas and model go away. I don't think what will not go away is that sort of mutual benefit of I can design things free form and pull in lots of data sources, or I can model things logically and auto generate. Those two values will always be part of the product. I think we're just going to smooth over the very rigid seams that exist between them today.
Sounds good. One of the things I've been getting some feedback from the market is around the concern for the ALM story at the moment for Canvas, and even a bit for Flow there, but we're seeing more talk around happening with Flow. What are your thoughts? What's the kind of the thinking around that area that you're having?
That's a big area of investment for us, for sure. Mm-hmm. And you saw us just last month go to preview with the ability to include Canvas apps and flows in solutions. That's obviously a preview. There's a lot of functionality that is yet to come there on the road to calling that generally available. Parameters, custom connectors. There's a long list of sort of breaking down that experience and making sure that the full set of assets are really up to snuff in the current ALM story. I think in parallel, we also realize that we want to evolve the current ALM story. We have now multiple teams here in the platform between admin and folks that we're now staffing up to focus specifically on ISVs and professional developers, as well as the maker teams and core platform teams really coming together to say, how do we evolve this concept of what it means to manage the lifecycle of an application? Today it's very environment or org centric, right? I sort of go to each destination and push things out or pull things in. It's very difficult to get a view of all of the different moving parts in a project, across those different environments and across those different stages. We are actively working on closing that gap and bringing productivity to that experience as well. And so I won't say too much about specifics because our thoughts are being formed, but I think we will. We are actively seeking input on that front from the community right now. We are also actively looking at other assets close to home here in Microsoft, lifecycle services in F&O, looking at even, some of the great investments Microsoft has in Azure DevOps and GitHub. There's just a lot. There's a lot here in the family that can bring a lot of richness to that experience, and we know it's crucial to building the ecosystem we want to build of ISVs and integrators and professionals that are going to build mission critical stuff on this platform.
So good. Listen, it's been about since March that I've heard anything about PCF.
Okay.
So there's kind of been no comments, if you like, since March.
Yeah.
Kind of, what's your thinking around that? Is it still on track? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so you'll start to hear a lot more publicly early next calendar year. Which we're coming up on fast. I will say we have had continuous usage by a set of people in the private preview, including several ISVs building really impressive controls into model-driven experiences, and we've also been really rapidly catching up with that feedback and adding a lot to the platform. Part of what's also caused us to pause, not pause, but to sort of, take a wider view is we want to make sure that as we converge the app platforms, that I can build a control as a professional developer that works both in a model-driven app and in a Canvas app. And so, you'll start to see from us early next year both the fruition of our model-driven efforts coming to market, and that will happen first, And I don't want to speak with authority. I'll actually defer to some of the folks working on it, but I believe we have a public preview slated there for early in the calendar year.
Awesome.
And then you'll see a preview sort of shortly following that of the ability to use the same methods inside of the campus as well. So we really looked at the architecture there, and we looked at sort of how do we, frankly, economize our resources on controls in general across these app types. And that's part of the unification efforts for us. And I think it'll be exciting to start to roll that out more broadly in 2019.
Nice. So just thinking about 2019, there's a bunch of, ISVs considering where, what's the story going forward? Can we build add-ons that are purely Power Platform add-ons? In other words, no, first-party apps or the Dynamics suite not involved at all. What would your advice be, for example, to let's say it's a startup, a company coming in fresh, and they're going, should I consider the Power Platform to build, a line of business application that I see a vertical opportunity as an example for? What's your advice around, getting them or encouraging them to take a seriously look at the platform?
That's a great question, and I can speak to it from experience as a very small startup building, business software. Right? I think the default mode for a lot of companies in that position, without question, initially is, well, we've got to go build all this ourselves. We've got to go stand up a bunch of low-level services in a commodity cloud, and we've got to go pick a database and pick an auth provider and pick a security model and pick a logging infrastructure and pick a, and it becomes this sort of, shopping list at the lumberyard of low-level pieces. And then you're going into your proverbial garage and trying to hack it together. And so many of those pieces are just fundamentally non-interesting and non-competitive from a startup perspective, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's just everybody needs a structured relational database, and everybody needs an auth provider, right? And so I think the core value that this platform offers, and that ISVs are taking seriously today, is we take a lot of that, basically, non-differentiated but time-consuming and costly stuff off the plate from the beginning, right? There's a data platform that has many petabytes of structured business data in it and billions of dollars of business relying on it right now, and you can use it. There's an auth system in AAD that has hundreds of millions of monthly active users leveraging it in companies right now, and you can use it. And there's even a pretty robust UI framework for generating forms and views and custom stuff, and you can use it right now. Why go recreate all that stuff from scratch? And in some ways, the reason to go build on platform as an integrator or an end customer is exactly the same reason to go build on platform for an ISV. And the kicker with it, which I think becomes really important for enterprise software companies, which I think many young ones don't really fully appreciate when they start out, if they haven't been to this rodeo before, is that it's not just about building the finished off-the-shelf SaaS product and hoping it's going to be perfect for everybody. Extensibility is crucial, right? And ALM is crucial, and governance is crucial, right? And so it's all those downstream things that you benefit from when you're building on the platform as well. We've got a great ISV in the higher education space that builds a whole bunch of experiences for higher education institutions to manage faculty, manage courses, manage stuff. And at the fundamental level, it's a CRM use case. But I think they've realized that, we can go faster by leveraging the platform that already exists and adapting it than rebuilding it ourselves. But B, even in the higher education market, right? Your public state university in California has radically different needs than your private liberal arts school in Ireland. And the ability to then go adapt and customize workflow and process and applications on top of a platform is incredibly valuable and something that's very costly for any one software company to build. So are there trade-offs with adopting a platform and taking dependencies? Definitely. But there's a ton of value, right now. And it's an area where we are very actively investing in making sure the experience of doing that, the lifecycle management, the developer tooling, the DevOps, are really top notch and bringing them up to snuff to what the world expects right now. We've actually hydrated a whole team just dedicated to that problem recently, and happy to introduce you to some of those folks as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Listen, we'll get on to some quickfire questions. Been great, cool. And there's so much more to go on, but we're running out of time quickly. So a couple of quickfire questions. These don't need to necessarily relate to your job, but just life in general.
Fair enough.
What's the one thing you've always wanted to do and haven't done yet?
Build $1 billion business, which is why I'm here.
Awesome.
So we're on the way.
That's good. I love it. It reminds me of a song. What's the one productivity tool you use every day?
PowerApps, of course, man. I'm obligated to say that, but it's true. I mean, we are increasingly dogfooding our product and using it for a whole bunch of processes here. The way I check out what's on every train and shipping is in a PowerApp today.
Nice.
And it's a great tool.
What new technology do you think is going to transform the future?
Laser discs. I'm kidding.
Right. I was like,
the fax machine. Yes.
I thought you were going to say power. I thought you were going to say PowerApps.
Yeah, I said that for the last one, right?
I know.
No, like it's. I think this is a tough question to answer, honestly, and most people who have historically answered it have been dead wrong. But I really think, yes, obviously, PowerApps is currently transforming the present. I think what I get excited about looking at the future is running the play that we are running right now about making app building and innovation faster and easier for more people, but applying that to a broader range of technology than just forms over data, right? And when we start to look at, how do we go make prediction easier? How do we go make object detection easier? How do we go make bot building easier? How do we go make augmented reality easier, right? These are things that a year or two ago were rocket science level questions and are becoming much more practical and real to answer. And I really do think that's going to have a massive impact on how businesses run. And
so true.
Thrilled to be a part of it.
Who do you recommend as a guest on the podcast of the future?
Oh man, well, I think I've dropped some names for you in this session. I think if to the extent of rounding out your Power Platform set, definitely chatting with James, our admin PM lead, and Julie, our ISV PM lead, sound like they would be interested.
What's Julie?
Julie Strauss.
Oh yeah, I know Julie.
Yep.
I was just checking that it was a Julie meaning.
Yep.
Yeah, excellent.
But I would also say we have some really phenomenal customers and champions who are just great advocates and great stories on the platform. And many of these are folks who have not been sort of long-time dyed-in-the-wool Dynamics people, but are just recently coming to the platform through discovering PowerApps as part of their Office subscription. That ranges from, Samit at Heathrow and Keith at Ariva. We've been on some of our event stages. Ian at Standard Bank in South Africa has just built a phenomenal practice around PowerApps in his organization. And they've got great stories, and they're the real evidence and the real heroes of what's possible on the platform.
Awesome.
So, happy to make some intros there as well.
So good. Yeah. Ryan, it's been great to have you on the show. Before you go, if people want to find you online, kind of follow what you're up to on the socials, where can they find you?
I don't always tweet, but when I do, it's at RC_says on Twitter. Also, my alias at Microsoft is RYCU, Raiku at Microsoft.com, and I'll take a question from anyone there. And happy to do it. I'm also fairly active in our discussion forums at PowerApps.com, as is much of the product team. So happy to find people there as well.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'd love to hear from you and get your ideas on PowerApps. Any feedback, please just go to nz365guy.com and leave your thoughts. If you enjoyed the show, can you please take a minute to leave a review on iTunes? Please go to nz365guy.com/iTunes. I'd appreciate it. For full show notes, you can go to nz365guy.com/72, and bye for now.